We're going to call the meeting to order. Good morning. I'd like to welcome Sean O'Halloran to the commission. It's his first commission meeting today, so hopefully we will be gentle. Sean is Vice President of Government and Public Affairs at Nike, and prior to joining Nike, he was Senior Vice President at Honeywell International and was Director of Washington Affairs at Union Pacific. He's held several positions in government, including service to the President in the White House and as Assistant Secretary of Transportation for the U.S. Department of Transportation during the creation of the TSA and its transition to the Department of Homeland Security. So we welcome you, and I expect that your experience will come in quite handy for us, and we will appreciate it here. Thanks so much. Now I'll call for a motion and second for approval of the minutes of the regular commission meeting of May 9th, 2018.
So moved.
Any questions or comments? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. And I'll ask Curtis for his executive director's report and remarks.
Great, thank you, Madam President. And Sean, I'd also like to welcome you to the commission. Congratulations, I think, for having two of the state's most important commissions at the same time. I don't know that that's a popular or a smart thing to do, but it's great. And to staff, congratulations on getting his nameplate right after a few iterations of misspellings of O'Halloran. And for those of you port nerds, it's important to note that Ken O'Halloran in our Marine Department is Sean's cousin, right? First cousin, I think. Let me start first recognizing our safety champions up here. Again, a good cross-section of folks in the port, different parts of the port, really focusing on taking leadership positions in safety. Really happy to see it again. Stan, I wonder if you'd start our day with a safety message.
You bet. So my message today is on June's National Safety Month campaign and how we are using it to influence our employees and their families to think of at least one change they can make to improve their safety this June. This month, the Port is exercising our membership with the National Safety Council, promoting and engaging in the National Safety Month campaign, which has a rallying cry this year of "No one gets hurt." National Safety Month focuses on reducing leading causes of injuries and deaths at work, on the road, and in our homes and our communities. And every 3 minutes, someone dies from something that is 100% preventable. National Safety Month is a call to action to reverse this trend. Utilizing employee involvement through our safety committees, we're providing safety resources highlighting a different topic each week in June and encouraging employees to bring safety home as well. So the first week is on emergency preparedness. Disasters don't wait, and so we're asking people to prepare emergency plans. We do it well here at work. We're asking them to have an emergency plan at home. An example of an activity that took place in the first week here at the port was the Dredge Oregon crew did a man overboard drill and then did an operational check on all of their personal locator beacons. The second week is going to be on wellness, and I did not know this, but there are 70 million Americans that suffer from a sleep disorder, and sleep is a very important part of our overall wellness, and so we're encouraging people to think about that and to get at least 7 hours of sleep every night. Week 3 is going to be on preventing falls. This is the number one office safety hazard. And so watch out for tripping dangers, and remember, as I talked about distracted driving, distracted walking is also very dangerous. And so I'd like to encourage people to quit emailing and texting while they're walking. And then the last week, week 4, will be on safe driving. There were 15,000 people saved last year by using their seat belts, so we're encouraging people to use all the safety devices in their cars so that they remain safe. And please remember, the peak driving season is coming up. It occurs on the week of July 4th. So the mission of the National Safety Council is to eliminate preventable injuries and deaths in work, in homes, and in our communities, and on the road. And they do this through their leadership, research, education, and advocacy. And through our membership, I'm inviting employees to take advantage of its benefits and to share the facts, tip sheets, and mitigation tools with their families to ensure no one gets hurt this June or throughout the rest of the year. That's
Great.
the message.
Thank you, Stan. Very much appreciate it. Honestly, I'm sitting here thinking to myself, I'm one of the 70 million with a sleep disorder. Her name is Mirabelle. She's 5 years old. But in all seriousness, we did take some time this month to talk to our kids about the safety plan. And so the family plan at the house is a great step for folks to take and be responsible on your own front. I would like to acknowledge this week we had Airports Council International in town. They did their national conference, actually North America conference here in Portland. We had several of our own leadership team as guest speakers and hosts. Many port employees helped with that process of hosting hundreds of leaders from around the country. And I'll just tell you, we're a hit. People are very impressed with PDX. We hosted a tour and a visit out here on Sunday, I believe. I was a speaker on equity plans at airports on Monday, and I just got great feedback from folks about how impressed they are with our operation and with our team. So congratulations to the team working this week on that. We celebrated last week the 30th anniversary of the clock tower in the airport. It was a great event. A lot of folks who've been around for a long time in the operation of PDX were here. I saw Mort from Pendleton last night who said he teared up. It was such an emotional experience for folks, but just a great celebration of showcasing Oregon products inside the airport around the clock tower. A clock tower that will likely be removed in some form when we get into the terminal core construction project, but it was a real hallmark for the airport and real exciting time last week. For those of you who are keeping track, we did open over the weekend Deschutes Brewery inside the airport. It looks great. First of two big contracts you may recall from a year ago. The next one is Hopworks. It's going to open in the fall. Is that right, Vince, Chris? September, October? Thank you. Deschutes is one of the first big-time breweries in Oregon, started in 1988 in Bend. As a fan of Mirror Pond, I'll tell you it's fantastic, and we're really excited to add them to the local favorites inside the airport. You can feel the wires and the treetops humming now. There's a lot of action at the airport. The passenger flows are up. I understand from our friends at Capers that they had their biggest day of the year on Sunday. We're just really starting to see the crush of summer traffic. So for travelers, it's good now in the summer to arrive a little bit early. Think about parking and use our brand new website to check out parking flows. For those of you who didn't see it, our IT and comms and web design team have come out with a great new version of the Port of Portland and PDX websites. It looks great. It's worth a little cruise when you get a minute. Works on all kinds of devices, including iPads and phones, and it looks really great. Finally, we're spending a lot of time on trade for obvious reasons, and as I've talked about before, I really view the port as an advocate around trade, trying to help connect Oregon businesses to international markets. In this time of what I'd call a great deal of uncertainty around trade, we're continuing that focus on trying to talk to more people. I actually have an interview with the Oregonian later today on the topic, but we've had some great partners in the Oregon business space. I met with nurserymen yesterday talking about Oregon nursery products, getting them out to other markets, and next week, we'll be participating in a panel with World Oregon and Oregon Business Magazine to talk about the benefits of trade to Oregon. And lastly, June 30th, at the end of this month, Cully Park, our neighbors here just off the airport, Cully Park will open. Great partnership with the port and other members of the community. We're really excited about the community getting a nice new space and look forward to that opening on June 30th. So, Madam President, that's all I've got.
Thank you, Curtis. I'll call for a motion and second to accept the Executive Director's report. Any comments or questions? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Vince, if you could come introduce the first general discussion item. Sorry, did we have anyone signed up to speak?
Don't believe so.
Okay, thank you, Vince.
Good morning. So we're here today to give you just an informational update on the PDX Terminal Concessions Program, the food and beverage and retail services. We want to just give a baseline update on what the program is, some of the contractual arrangements, who we have relationships with, and a little bit about what our model is. And after that, we're going to have Christian Kaler come up. He's a workforce economist with the state of Oregon, and he's going to present data on wages for certain concession employees here at the airport. This was a question that's been answered about the relationship between street pricing and wages, and we've had him do an analysis of that, and we'll let him come up and talk about that. So with the concessions program, as we've talked before, these are complicated businesses. Every airport has a model, and some of them have direct relationships with lessees. Some of them turn over the program to larger operators. There's always different contract terms in terms of how much rent they pay, what do they do for storage, how are utilities covered, and so on. And it's also different between a retail operator. Is it a full-service restaurant? Is it a pop-up? So there's different kinds of structures. And so for us, we're going to talk a little bit about what we do in our program. And as Curtis mentioned, we've just celebrated our 30-year anniversary of the clock tower, and that was really the beginning of the foundation of the program that we have here. That was when we turned over the program to do individual leases from what it was before, which was just a single operator. Here at PDX, we do provide a significant amount of support to our concessionaires, and as we've talked, we do have a strict street pricing policy, which we do audit and enforce. And that does, at various other airports around the country, there's varying levels of what street pricing actually is. Obviously, we've experienced a lot of change in the last 30 years in the concessions program, going back to 1988 and the clock tower. But really, since 2014, we've had a number of changes. And as we've talked, we've turned over almost 3/4 of the operators and created new opportunities for folks. Because of lease expirations. We've also invested money in storefronts, utilities, and new infrastructure. And then the tenants themselves have invested about $25 million of their own money in their stores as well. So for us, having this robust, dynamic concession program is really important to our customer experience here at PDX. It's a big part of why PDX, I think, does get good reviews, good feedback from the traveling public and certainly the businesses here as well. So the basic fundamental principles that we've had have been here for a long time. We think that they do make sense and they do contribute to the program. So with that, I'm going to stop and let Chris talk a little bit more about just the details of the program itself, and then we'll have Christian come up and talk about the actual data that he studied.
Great. Thanks, Vince. Thanks, Vince, for the good introduction. Good morning. It's always a pleasure to come and talk about our concession program with you publicly. It's been a great week here. As Curtis mentioned, we have a lot of our colleagues and peers in town, and we took them through on Sunday. And I think the short of it is that they are envious of what we do here and what we're able to do with our program. There's a long history behind that, but a big piece of it is the support that we get from leadership and from including the commission. So just wanted to say thank you up front for that. My goal here today is to give you a little bit of background on the program, some general information, lay of the land, talk a little bit about our business structures that we have in place here, and review the results. We're very fortunate to have a number of great, iconic brands in our backyard. Certainly Nike, Columbia, Pendleton. These are all brands that are known locally, but also recognized internationally and nationally. So we're very fortunate in many ways to have those here, not only in the area supporting our business, but in the terminal. We have a lot of local brands that aren't known by folks outside of the region. But when we have travelers who come from other parts of the country, they're interested in that because they sort of understand the cool vibe that Portland brings, and they want to experience that. So that's a big piece of why we're successful. We also have there's an importance to the mix that we have here too. So it's about balancing the local brands along with brands that are recognized worldwide. So running a good concession program is a challenge. It has complexities. These are some of the factors that are involved in having a successful program. There isn't just one particular thing that you can pick out and say, that if you do this, you'll be successful. We have, as I mentioned, the benefit of great, strong local brands. You have to have balance in the program. You have to give people what they want, what the customers want. We do a lot of surveys to ask that question, and we try to deliver the concepts, the food and beverage and the retail that they're looking for. We have a tax-free environment, and that's kind of an obvious one. And so particularly on the retail side, that drives a lot of our revenue. We have a lot of airport employees who participate here, port employees who are in the airport for lunch and coffee, but also many of the tenant employees who eat here at the airport and shop here. And I think there's a direct correlation there with our street pricing policy and that effect. We provide a lot of direct operational assistance, essentially round-the-clock, 24/7 assistance to our operators. That's particularly important to our small businesses who haven't operated in an airport environment before, and the challenges that go along with that. We have a very customer-centric culture here that has been built over many years. I think we continually hear about the experience that passengers have, not only in our concession program, but through our VIPs, the experience they have at TSA. All of that is just part of the embedded culture here at PDX. We've gone through a significant redevelopment phase here over the last 4 years. 75% of our post-security program has been turned over. Here are the 2014 results. You'll recognize a lot of these local names who've been in place here now for 4 years. And they seem new to me, but in many ways they've really established themselves and are very successful. In 2016, we had a robust RFP process. This was largely a coffee RFP along with specialty retail. We brought in Stumptown, Starbucks, and Pete's Coffee during this rollout, as well as Portland Roasting, who you all know here locally. This was probably the largest RFP done here in the concession program, and it was a very difficult one, but a successful one, and we're happy with all of our partners. We also do direct leasing. Typically we will issue an RFP and solicit these concepts through a competitive process, but we also do some direct leasing where it makes sense to fill in gaps, vacancies, or do something really unique and special in the airport. And these three examples are a really great example of how we accomplish that. We did that directly with Blue Star Donuts, directly with a husband and wife team who operate and own Tender Loving Empire, but we also worked with HMS Host to bring in a great local brand in Tamale Boy. The latest round of RFPs that were approved in August of 2017 include Deschutes, which just opened last week, Hopworks Urban Brewery, a B Corporation, and a great local community partner, along with Johnston & Murphy, one of those more nationally recognized airport brands for men's clothing. So all in total, the program today looks like this. We have 68 locations and 54 leases. That is completely different than you will see at any other airport. Typically for 60 to 70 locations in an airport, there may be 2 to 5 leases that go along with that. So many of these leases are for one space with one operator, and that helps build a lot of diversity within the program. We are also, some of that requires a little more staffing and a little more hands-on work with our tenants, and we have 8 full-time staff that are focused on developing the program, recruiting the front end piece of that, and negotiating the contracts. And then we have 5 people who provide the operational support. We're not done. We have work in front of us. Concourse E Extension is coming in May of 2020. This is a 6-gate extension. We'll have a number of new opportunities here within this space, some quick serve restaurants, bar with food, specialty retail, as well as the coffee that was awarded back in 2016. So we look forward to issuing that RFP late 2018, early 2019. We also have the Terminal Core project, which will impact many of our concessionaires who operate today in the Oregon market and create new opportunities in post-security locations that generate more revenue. So this is going to be our big challenge over the next 5 years, is finding new homes for these tenants, transitioning to new opportunities, and really just working through all of the construction phasing. We obviously understand the impact that this will have not only on our customers, but on the employees of the tenants. And I think the programs that we've developed here will help us tremendously as we work through that. Speaking of, we've done a lot since 2014 to help employers and employees with their operating, recruiting, and retention here in the airport. These are some of the programs that go along with our PDX Workplace Initiative. We've also initiated a RFP criteria of 25%, which evaluates businesses on how they treat their employees, how they pay them, what kind of benefits they offer. But some of these programs have been really influential in how some of these small businesses operate here. The TriMet Pass program, just to mention one, we initiated that with a 25% port subsidy. We increased that in January to 50% in order to try to get more participation in that. And the way that works is we buy a monthly pass, and we pay for $50. It's a $100 pass. Port pays for $50, and we hope that the employers will share in that cost or provide it as a benefit to employees. So we're also very excited about the 24-hour bus service that will be coming here soon, and that's been one of the tough problems for us to solve, and that will certainly help with our employers who are working late at night. So turning a little bit to the structure of the program, there are a lot of challenges to operating in an airport environment. It's different than the street in many ways, but there are benefits that go along with that, and these benefits are very strong. Having a captive audience, you have 60 to 70,000 people per day passing through and who are right in front of your store, and you don't get that anywhere on the street. You have a certain amount of predictability. There is a little bit of change. Our industry is always changing, but there is predictability on a day-to-day basis in terms of schedules, and that helps with staffing, and you know the volumes and the flight activity that will be around your store. Very high volumes driven by many customers, and certainly one of the benefits of being in the airport is having that brand there and the billboard for everyone to see. The challenges are real. It's not for everybody. We've structured our program to try and help support people to come in and do business here and also to continue and be successful. But there are unique insurance and security deposit requirements that the port has, badging fees, access to the airport, parking, just the challenges that go with that on a day-to-day basis. And labor cost is a little bit higher percentage of gross revenues. It requires, this varies depending on what kind of operator you are, but it requires a little more staffing just because it's a little more difficult to get around the airport. And then, the tendency is that in order to compete for workers, you have to pay a higher wage. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about our leasing structure. We have a number of different leasing and business arrangements here. Primarily, we try to do and focus on the small, local, direct one-for-one that I mentioned earlier. And that's 47% of our leases here. Some of those examples, just a few of them: Portland Roasting, Powell's, Country Cat. Those are small local businesses that operate here. We have corporate relationships with Columbia, Nike, and McDonald's. That's very typical also in the airport industry to have those large corporate operators. And then we also work with large airport operators like SSP America, who opened Deschutes here recently, but also HMS Host, Hudson, Paradies, all of the large operators who really, this is their core business, is operating and managing airport concessions. So it takes all of these and kind of a balance of this in order to fit all of the spaces and provide a balanced program for our customers. Typical term on these leases is long, 10 years on food and beverage, 7 years on retail. That's typical. We sometimes extend those for longer terms, but this is about the lifespan of a brand and relevancy, and you try to keep the program fresh, but you also want to give the business an opportunity to amortize their investment over that term. Shifting a little bit to the results, here we have, I'm not sure what I'm doing wrong, but we've been fortunate to be recognized by the industry and by our customers over the past several years. In particular, I'll just point out here the recognition from ACI last year that it was the first time that they had recognized both the program and the management team as the best in the industry. So that combination really is a great recognition for us. We also, of course, the Travel and Leisure Award that we've been fortunate to win here over the last 5 years and are anxiously awaiting to hear what the results are this year. We think the concession program is a big piece of that. It's not the entire picture, but it is a big piece of it. Our small and disadvantaged business participation is strong. We exceed our goals that are approved by the FAA. 23% actual participation, and 44% of our locations have some ACDBE participation. That's accomplished in a number of ways. Primarily, we love the 100% ownership. An example of that is Bambuza or Capers, where they are 100% owned by an ACDBE. But we also have participation by ACDBE firms through joint ventures with larger operators. We survey our customers regularly, and we ask them what's important to them. No real surprises here, but for food and beverage, people want to get to their gate. They want to be they don't want to miss their flight. But behind that, reasonable prices and having the concepts, the selection and quality are important. On the retail side, again, being able to get to the gate on time, which just emphasizes the need for great customer service within the space, but reasonable pricing and having the right mix of brands. The trend has been very strong since we've gone through this redevelopment. Here you see the food and beverage satisfaction ratings. What this tells you is that in 2017, 83% of our customers rate their experience in the food and beverage program an 8, 9, or a 10, with 10 being the top. Similarly, in the retail program, we are at 86% in 2017. So this is a great trend, and one, frankly, that is a little bit surprising as we go through redevelopment and do a lot of construction and close stores and open new concepts. You may not expect this sort of trend, but it's a tribute to the work that's been done by the development team and our operations team, and of course our business partners. This translates to strong sales per in-plane passenger. The primary metric by which we measure our revenue success is sales per in-plane passenger. We look at the in-plane passenger because that's the passenger who typically spends money. Arriving customers are headed toward their car and want to get to where they're going. So that's not to say that they don't spend money, but we use the in-plane passenger metric. We've seen here since 2005 very steady growth and rapid growth in the last few years, 47% sales per in-plane passenger growth in that time. This is important for our business because the rent that we receive, which is a portion of the gross revenues, goes to offset our operating and maintenance cost and capital cost here for the airport. That helps keep our costs structure favorable, helps promote airline service and keep fares reasonable. So all of this is important to the whole of the business. How we compare to other peer airports, and you'll see that the numbers here are a little bit different than the previous slide, Previous slide, we showed 1366 in 2017. This is 1291, and that's just because the last year available for all airports is 2016. So we're using the 2016 number of 1291 per passenger. You can see some of the comparable airports here: Tampa, Seattle, San Diego. These are airports that are peers to us in some ways, and we always are benchmarking ourselves against the industry. So with that, I'll just close with a few comments about our street pricing program. As Vince mentioned earlier, this is a long-standing practice that's been around since 1988. It's become part of our brand. It is not just something that we put in our contracts, but it is part of what we're known for as well with our customers. We audit that program and we enforce it strictly. And there are always, I guess I would say that to do that is difficult. You're looking at a lot of different metrics on the street, and it requires a lot of diligence and partnership with our operators to maintain that price of a beer here at a bar at PDX is the same as what they're paying on the street. It is very uncommon to have a strict street pricing policy. Many airports will have a street plus 5%, 10%, 15%, even 20%. And then the audit, it's only as good as it is audited. So again, we strictly enforce that policy, and it helps keep everybody in check. It's increasingly important in retail, particularly. Customers are obviously very price savvy, looking for value, and we think that anything but a street pricing policy for our retailers would be very difficult for their business. It incentivizes efficiency in the operation. It does force operators to think about waste and look for opportunities to make sure that I think as one concessionaire put it here, make sure that fewer onions go in the trash and they're going in the food. So it really does force operators to be diligent, to pay attention, and we think that benefits the program or the operation overall in terms of customer experience and efficiency. And then, as I stated earlier, it is just one component. It is not the reason solely why we're successful, but it is one piece of a balanced program. So that's what I have. Be happy to take any questions at this point.
We can do that and then have Christian come
I think
up.
it'd be in the interest of time if we could have the Christian's presentation, and then if you guys are available for questions from the commission after that, that would be great.
Okay.
Great, and I'm going to stay here, but just really quickly share this portion of the presentation is in response to a request from the commission to really look into and determine what the relationship looks like as it relates to street pricing and wages. So today we have the results of the analysis produced by Christian Kaler, who is a workforce economist with the Oregon Employment Department. Scott Drum, our Director of Research and Strategic Analysis, will describe the approach and then introduce Christian and his presentation.
Good morning. As we began this work, we sought the counsel of outside experts to help us figure out not only how we go about answering this particular question, but also to identify suitable third parties who could do this kind of work for us. We met with academics, we met with economists, we met with consultants, and their consensus recommendation was to work with our state employment department to see if they had the data and the capacity to do this analysis on our behalf. So we sat down with Christian, who, as Kristen said, is a workforce economist with the Oregon Department of Employment, to talk about this particular research question and get his thoughts about how one might approach it and if there was data he had and a methodology he could apply to help answer the question. After looking at the confidential data that Christian has access to, he determined that with that data, he could develop a methodology to answer the question about this relationship. So that is what he is here to present today. So a little bit of background on Christian. He has been with the Oregon Employment Department for 18 years, has done a wide variety of studies and analyses for the department. You may be familiar with some of his more recent work, which has looked at the income disparity between East and West Multnomah County, for example. He is on the governor's regional solutions team for the Portland metro area, serves on the Council of Economic Advisors for the mayor for the city of Portland, and is on Prosper Portland's Broadway Corridor Advisory Committee. With that, I'll turn it over to Christian.
Thank you, Scott. Commissioners, good to be here. It was a snowy day when Scott and Ms. Leonard came trudging down to my office, and I was the only one, I think, in the office that day. I think I unlocked the door for you, so it was good. I take the number 4 bus, so I got to work pretty easily in the snow, and you guys made it out. And I got asked about this sort of issue, and it's a neat opportunity because I do have access to. The scroll wheel does not appear to actually be advancing the slides, but if somebody could just, thank you. I have access to the confidential payroll tax data for the state of Oregon. So if you look on your pay stub, you'll see there's lots of deductions for lots of things: Medicare, Social Security, state income tax, et cetera. And one of the things is unemployment insurance. So the Oregon Employment Department administers this. This is administrative data that we have by Social Security number for all individuals in Oregon who are covered. So self-employment, for instance, would not be I wouldn't be able to see that. But if you are covered, we have data on you, and it is data that I am privileged to have access to. I have to sign a form every couple of years. I have to take a test, and they put a form in front of me that says I recognize that it's a felony if I misuse or share this data inappropriately or whatever. And in fact, it's a Class C felony. So if you have any questions for me, I can't answer them. It's a felony. I'm sorry. So just I don't know. But I may play that card later. I reserve the right to play that card. But I want to talk a little bit about some of the restrictions in the data that I do have. I work a lot with, as Scott mentioned, a lot of consultants, a lot of government agencies who say, oh, well, you have all the W-2s for everybody in the state of Oregon. You can answer this question. But there are serious limitations beyond just the obvious confidentiality issues. I cannot reveal the revenue or tax or payroll data for an individual company, or certainly not an individual person and how much money he or she made. But beyond that, keep in mind that you might think for a moment about your own W-2. If you look at your W-2, it has a lot of very confidential information about you, your name and your address, and how much money you earned for that one employer. Now, you may have multiple W-2s if you work for multiple companies. I'll circle back to that in a moment. But it does not say if you were a seasonal worker or a part-time worker. It does not say if you started that job in the middle of the year. It does not have your occupational title. It does not indicate whether you are the janitor or the CEO. So I have this data, but I don't know what the actual responsibilities of the individual are. And I don't know if that person is working 20 hours a week, 40 hours a week, if that person took 6 months unpaid leave in the middle of the year. I have no way of knowing that. That is not reported in the payroll tax data that I have access to. So that's a problem. And then, of course, high turnover. I think a lot of us here, Scott mentioned, I've been in this job 18 years. So I bring to you 18 years of expertise. Also, I have not been promoted in 18 years. So, when you see my boss, you might say something. And I've had a full-time job for 18 years. It's very nice. Through the 1990s, living in Eugene, I probably had 3 jobs in a year going through high school and college, doing various things. Keep in mind, in retail and food service, it's common to see turnover rates in excess of 50% a year. So you have people coming in, they're starting in the middle of the month, they're starting in the middle of the week, they're starting, they're doing seasonal, they're doing part-time. So there's a lot of variation when you look at an individual's payroll tax data. That makes analysis extremely challenging, especially in retail and food service. If you look at something like law firms or something, you have very low turnover rates, something like 4 or 5%. Things where they move so slowly, you can actually really sort of look at individuals and make the assumption that they're working full-time. You really can't make that assumption at all with these types of businesses. And then maybe the largest complication here, and I typed this up as diplomatically as I could. Employers are required to report the specific locations of employees by work sites. So what I did, and we'll get an analysis here in the next slide, was I looked at storefronts where you had a single business and they had multiple storefronts in Multnomah County. I thought about and decided not to look at Clackamas or Washington County, but if that's something people feel passionate about, I'm happy to revisit the analysis. So if I had a business that had only one presence at the airport, but didn't have a presence anywhere else in Multnomah County, I did not study that. I dropped that. If I had a business that only had two storefronts, one at the airport and one in, say, Gresham or something, I dropped that because it's not really much of a comparison between just two. So I looked at a number that were in the neighborhood of, I probably had a few, I know that I had a few that were, there were 3, 4, 5. I had maybe 1 or 2 where they have more than 10 storefronts in Multnomah County. I really liked those when I could get them. I looked at all of those. One of the issues that we run into, and again, I want to be very diplomatic about this, employers are required to break out the actual location where their employees work. The observation of that, especially among smaller firms, is, to put it diplomatically, not great. I think a lot of companies where they say, okay, you know, Becky worked in March at the Gresham location, in April at the airport location. How confident am I that that business is accurately reporting where specifically Becky worked? The smaller the company, the less confident I am that they reported that accurately. The larger the company, they're much more likely to have an advanced tracking system, a payroll system that really logs into the minute when they log in, where they log in, and where they check out. And hopefully one assumes they're reporting more accurately the actual location of where those folks work. But it's also quite common with all these companies for folks to work, 1 week, 1 month at one location, the airport, and then another week, another month at another location. So it made the analysis fairly tricky. Next slide, please. And do you have this? Is this in a packet or something, or is this? Oh, okay. Well, this is the report. I'm a big fan. I am the king of the one-page report, and this is the one page that I sent to Scott. And it's fairly simple. What I did was I looked at 10 companies. To be honest, actually, I first looked at 7, and then Scott and I chatted, and he said, could you find some more? And I found 3 more. I anonymized them by listing them as business A through J. And as quickly as possible, I discarded the name of the company and then continued to analyze the company as business A, B, C, D, or G. And there's 2 or 3 of them I could maybe guess who they were, but honestly, most of these I've forgotten, which is, I think that's good for sort of keeping me honest around the confidentiality issues. So I'll pick on A, and we'll very quickly go through this. So the mean average payroll in 2016 for business A, which is a food service business, and I put these into 2 general categories, again, being sensitive about confidentiality. So 7 of them, I think, are food service, and 3 of them are retailers. And I'm being as broad as possible. I didn't want to zoom in and say, this is a sandwich maker or something, or, coffee shop or something. I didn't want people to be able to guess. So I kept it as general as possible. And we see with business food service A, they had an average mean payroll. And I want to be clear about this word mean average. What I'm doing is I'm taking the total payroll that business reported for all their employees at the airport and dividing it by the number of workers that they had. And so if that number is low, part of that is likely because of a lot of part-time employment, a lot of folks working. And again, whether that's part-time because they only work 6 months out of the year or they only work 20 hours a week, I don't know. So we get a little more than $20,000 a year outside of the airport among all their other locations, whether that was 2 or 5 or 10, average mean payroll of $16,231. That's a difference of 19%. And then I did something, I don't know how much people care about this. I typed it up here, and I'll talk about it for as much or as little as people like. I applied something called a student's T distribution of statistical significance. If anyone's into any field of science, chemistry, biology, economics, this is the most classic test of statistical significance you're going to see. A t-score that returns a standard deviation and a p-value ultimately of whether or not what you're seeing is statistically significant is just classic. And it was actually developed for the most honorable cause one can think of. It was developed to improve the quality of beer by a man named William Gossett, who in the 1890s had the best job on the planet Earth. He was in charge of quality control at Guinness in Dublin. And he was a brilliant mathematician from Oxford. And I wish my high school counselor at South Eugene High School had told me, you're getting these breweries, if you happen to meet with them and they ask about quality control, people who are very good at statistics, please advance my name. Get them in touch with me, that'd be great. So he was in charge of quality control. And so he actually developed this. His name was William Gossett. I published it. It was a breakthrough. You grab any college textbook that's been published in the last 100 years. The last page will be a table of values from the student's tea distribution. I see a couple of people nodding. You might remember this from college. So he actually developed this formula for determining whether something was unusual by taking a number of samples. He was sampling barley as an input into the Guinness brewery. And so again, we could chat about what that means, and I have a couple slides on that. But essentially, the key issue here is variance, and that is what I did is I looked at the average payroll of all of the retail or food service storefronts outside of the airport to see how tightly they're clustered or how not very tightly clustered they are. And then if the Portland airport is statistically significantly far from that, at a confidence level of 0.05, all that means is that they're at the 95th or higher percentile for what you would expect them to be compared to their cousins in the rest of the county, Multnomah County. Then I said, okay, it's statistically significantly higher. And so for A and B, they were 20%, 19%, 23%. C was right in line, 2% difference. Food service D was also higher, 17%. Food service E was 8% higher, but I decided the test returned no statistical significance there. So I think about 4 of them were statistically significantly higher. The only company that was small, well, I guess there's 2. Retail business G is lower by a fair amount, 34%. That is not statistically significant for a couple of reasons. And if people want to ask me about that, I'll talk about why without revealing who they are. And business J in food service was only 7% less. And I determined that one was also not statistically significant. So this is the real world. And this is sort of what happens in the real world when you look at a lot of messy economic data and you run statistical tests, is you don't get frequently a clear signal. Newspapers and magazines like to do headlines when somebody just determines that coffee is bad for you or coffee is good for you, and they sort of blare these results. But frequently this is what you see, the vast majority of the time in economic analysis is you see, well, you don't see a clear signal here that businesses are necessarily paying more or less. A few of them I do believe are in fact paying more. I don't believe any of them are paying less to a statistically significant degree. And most of them are generally in line. And I'll tell a story I told Scott. I don't know if they're in this analysis, but there's a food retailer that's also in my neighborhood, and I was working on this, and I just went. There's nobody standing in line at lunch, and I just asked him. I said, "You've got an airport location, right?" He goes, "Yeah. You ever work out there?" Yeah. You paid any more for working out at the airport location? He goes, "No." So, yeah, okay. So that's sort of roughly my feel going through this data, my analysis of how the conclusions I came to. You want to go maybe one more slide? And this is just a fun chart of a bell curve and standard deviations. And again, maybe I'll save this for any discussion or questions about what this means. But essentially what I did was I rejected the hypothesis. The scientific term is I rejected the hypothesis that there was no difference. I said, yes, there's a statistically significantly higher wage at the airport if the wage was modeled to be more than 2 standard deviations above the mean, which suggests that there's only about a 3% chance of you seeing that randomly, because that's how bell curves sort of work in standard deviations. And again, I don't know how interested or not you are in statistical methodology, and I'll leave that to the questions. So thank you.
Do we have questions that are specific to this work, or do we have questions that are broader?
I have a couple questions.
Please.
I was wondering if the data manipulation is done by a software program or if it's more rudimentary than that and you just gather the data.
Yeah, I pretty much use this pen. I have access to an online database. It's behind about 3 different firewalls of all the payroll tax data for the businesses. What did I do? I think the payroll database does return a mean average for the total payroll. And I pretty much did it almost by hand. I think I did it in Excel, but I could do it in hand if you gave me enough time and a function calculator.
And then a follow-up question to the previous slide. You said you had an additional comment about, I believe it was G.
Yeah.
Could you expand on that slightly?
Yeah. So we'll give it 20 questions with this one. How can I talk about G without revealing who they are? And in fact, we all probably know most of these. G only has 2 other locations in Multnomah County, and I believe I have strong reason to believe that one of their locations outside of the airport has more technical staff that does web sales and wholesale sales and other technical tasks, as opposed to just a retail presence, which is what you have at the airport for G.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think I'm more confused than I started. So very interesting data. What this doesn't tell me, and from what I'm hearing from you, you can't tell me, is which ones of these groups are represented by a union. And if they're represented by a union, that could explain why there's a higher wage. The second piece is comparing work done and work paid for within the airport compared to a similar occupation or a similar employer off the airport site doesn't tell me if street pricing hurts. The only way I think you could get to that is to say, what happens at other airports? What do the other airports pay? They tend to be more unionized, and in that comparison, does street pricing hurt us or helps us?
Yeah, I don't know how I'd answer that question. And again, I'm a state of Oregon employee. I only have access to Oregon data. If you wanted to reach out to some other states, I don't know. This is sort of a custom job, so I can't speak to whether or not this is a standard thing that other states would provide. Also, I've been to the San Diego airport. I do not consider it comparable to the Portland airport. I'll just put that out right now. But anybody who's been to the San Diego airport they know it's an issue in San Diego. I think it's a good question. And again, I think one of the major potential biases here is occupational title. If that's not reported, the employer isn't required to report that, or hours worked. So there's no way for me to know. Again, even if I was able to legally give you all of this data, no one could I think answer that question. As the union thing, Scott mentioned that I think to me a month or 2 ago, and I hadn't thought of it while doing the analysis at all. I will say that at least one of these is unionized, but they're unionized throughout, and I think maybe a second one, but I couldn't tell you. It wasn't something I looked at or thought about while I was running the analysis.
A follow-up question, just in terms of other state data, I assume, and maybe you can't tell me not having seen it, that that data might also be influenced by whether or not different states have different minimum wage than Oregon does, and we'd have to take that into account.
Yeah, I would expect you would see lower numbers, but again, hypothetically, you could see more. Part of this, there's so many potential things here that could be skewing this. If there is a reason, and I can't think of anything, but if somebody else could think of a reason why maybe employers would be giving more full-time positions to workers at the airport versus part-time positions, I could imagine. I worked at a McDonald's on the U of O campus in Villard when I was in South Eugene High School, and I think most of us were high school or college students, so there was a lot of maybe part-time work. So maybe if I was comparing an airport location to a location that was near a high school or a community college or something where they had more part-time workers, that would skew these numbers. I'm not particularly aware of that, but yeah, this really is the best. And Scott and I had a lot of chats about this, and I said, boy, even aside from confidentiality issues, given the data that's available, and again, this is the best data available to anyone in the state of Oregon. It's not like there's another level of secret data out there that anyone could use, unless you're willing to do an actual survey of businesses. This is using the existing tax payroll data that's reported to the state of Oregon, the best that is available.
I got one.
Please.
One very quick question. All I need a quick answer, just 1 or 2 sentences. After all of this, as an individual person, what is the bottom line message out of this that I should go home with today? 1 or 2 sentences.
It's great. My overall sense is that the airport is not statistically significantly different from any other location for these companies, that there's not any interesting behavior. I mean, again, I found a few with hire, and I wonder if they're not maybe disproportionately, because people have to go through security or something, they might be disproportionately more full-time positions to airport workers or something. I think that the airport is pretty much kind of like any other location in Multnomah County for retail or food service pay, is my sense at going through the data. All right. Thank you for the question, Commissioner.
I have a question. I think on first blush, in sort of looking at this and just forming a quick opinion, you would say, gee, it looks as if workers at the airport are more favorably positioned relative to salary. But I'm trying to understand the definition of worker. When you begin to look at off-site individuals, does that include people there are administrative, shared responsibility staff that will not be on a workplace site here at the airport. Underwriters, if they're lucky enough to have a company economist.
Yeah.
So does all of that data also factor into the metrics for the
No.
non-airport? I mean, what defines worker?
Right. No, and I think that's an argument. That's a good point. I think that, and I think in the case of G, and what I know, and I can't tell you about them without naming them, but I think that there are other ones where there might be folks that are doing some online sales or something that's a little more technical. They need a second language. I'm trying to answer your question without giving you too much on G, but if you have a business where you have more supervisory type folks, or they're dealing with maybe a warehouse or something, loading, shipping, selling to other retailers, they might have a higher skill set, might be getting paid more, and those positions are more likely to exist outside the airport for a couple of these companies. Retail, food service might have more of a flagship sort of presence outside of the airport. And again, there's no way for me to know. I have the social security number for all the workers, but I don't have their job title, and I don't know what their job responsibilities are. So, yeah.
Okay, so let me ask it a different way then. I understand G. What would make any of the other examples dissimilar from G? This is not a headquarters location.
Mm-hmm.
They all have a headquarters location at some point where you've got shared services and other unique functions that support all of their workers.
Mm-hmm.
And those disciplines are somewhat different than the configuration of workers that we're looking at on site here. I'm just trying to figure out what goes into that number.
You don't have a Subway sandwiches at the airport, is that correct? Okay, so I'll pick on them. So I'm wondering if there was in there. Subway sandwiches has, I assume, a corporate headquarters somewhere, and that would not be. Imagine one of these is Subway, and it could have been if you had one at the airport. They would have a corporate headquarters that would not be included in this analysis. So trying to think of a company that you don't have in Portland. So Subway, it has folks that are corporate management. They have a warehouse that moves bread in and out. They do things like that. Those aren't retail, and so those wouldn't be included. But the retail Subway that you would walk into at the mall would look, generally speaking, a lot like the Subway sandwiches you might have at Concourse C. And so that's what I'm doing here with this analysis. That said, it's easily possible that they could be reporting some more managerial type employees at a retail location. And that's more likely to be true outside the airport than in the airport, I would think.
So essentially, your comparison was retail to retail. The only differentiation would be location, on-site versus off-site.
Yeah, I mean, as much as possible, I was trying to get apples to apples with only looking at businesses where they had multiple sites. And again, I don't think I did a single food cart because I just didn't. Typically they just had too few observations, and I'm not confident in the data quality there, which I don't want to talk too much about. But in the reporting. But I tried to pick anybody who had 4 or 5-ish sites in Multnomah County or more to try to give me as many apples to apples that they're treating their children, whether they're at the airport or in Gresham or Mall 205 or something, roughly the same for this comparison to see if there is a difference. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I have just a comment, which isn't really a question with respect to your data. I appreciate the study and the information, and I realize that it was tough to get all of the data together to answer this particular question. I think the reality is we as a commission have for years talked about the importance of making sure that there are fair wages and living wage jobs at the airport, whether folks are employed by the airport directly or by folks that lease property from us and the operators. I think this answers part of the question about whether the street pricing is the issue here, and I think we'll need to continue to have a conversation about how we can improve the situation for folks that work at the airport. And so I commend port staff for this, and I expect that we'll continue to talk about it. Any other discussion on this item? Okay, thank you. In the interest of time, because we have an 11 o'clock stop, we're going to move directly to the action items rather than the consent items. So Vince, if you could introduce the first agenda item, please.
Okay, and will you switch the presentation, please?
We're
Okay.
going to go to the action items, so we need to.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll get it called up here. The first one here that we have for action is a public improvement contract for the runway rehab phases 1 and 2 at Hillsborough. We did an investigation back in 2014. The pavement there really needed to be replaced and was at the end of its useful life. But it's a significant operational impact when there's only one large runway out at Hillsborough. So we've been working with the FAA for the last couple of years to get grant money for this, and we were able to work out an arrangement with them that we get 2 years of grants and be able to do these projects in 1 year. So we've got more work that will be coming here that we'll be getting your approval on. But here's Chris is here to present the recommendation for the first public improvement contract for phase 1 and 2.
Great. Thank you, Vince. And good morning. Today I'm requesting approval to award a construction contract to Kodiak Pacific for the runway 13 right, 31 left rehabilitation project, the amount of nearly $14 million. This shows the overall project location out at Hillsborough. As Vince pointed out, this is our main runway out there. We'll be reconstructing 2/3 of it, be putting LED lighting along the entire length of the runway, widening the shoulders to meet FAA standards, placing storm drainage improvements, electrical conduit, things of this nature. This shows the overall project schedule. The item bolded on your left is the action item before you today, but as Vince pointed out, you can see a lag between our award or approval today and the start of construction next year. And again, that was done in order for us to take those 2 grants and construct it under 1 year versus having impacts to our tenants over a 2-year period. Budget and funding. So we have the Kodiak contract before you today, which was awarded through a competitive low bid process. Electrical pre-purchase, personnel services, which was for a design consultant, which was done under executive director's authority. Port staff contracted services. This covers our inspectors, project management, testing, inspection, things of that nature. Our contingency is 10%, which is appropriate given the complexity of this project. It is funded out of our Port Cost Center as well as by the FAA. We have about 38% coming out of the Port Cost Center, while we'll have 62% coming from the FAA. And our DBE goal is 8% for this project. Staff requests approval of Executive Director's recommendation.
Just a quick question on the DBE goal. Was that set in conjunction with FAA, or is that a port determination?
Port determination.
Okay. Does the FAA have any sort of guidelines around how they would target that percent? I'm trying to get a sense of whether it's in line with projects of this size or outlier to the good or to the bad, just a sense.
Yeah, Kimberly's here.
Yeah.
The goal was set using USDOT goal-setting methodology, which is very stringent on how we examine the overall availability of firms to do business that are certified as DBE compared to those that are not certified. So there's no wiggle room in the goal. I will point out that Kodiak is a woman-owned construction firm, so there is some value added in the overall award of the dollars there, that a bulk of that will go to a woman-owned firm, but the goal is 8% DBE, and there's no wiggle room with that.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, I just wish to disclose that as an employee of Nike, and our flight operations are located at Hillsborough, and that reports up to me. And so just as a matter of disclosure, I do not think it's a conflict, but I wanted to be transparent in the fact that it would be in our interest to have this work done, and I just wanted to disclose that.
Any other comments or questions?
Well, the same. I think everybody knows I work for Intel, but those operations do not report up to me.
Okay, thank you.
But I am a frequent user of
The Hillsborough Airport.
of that airport.
Understood. If there are no other questions, I call for a motion and second on the Executive Director's recommendation.
Second.
Any other comments or questions? If not, all in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Yep.
Guess we're moving back to the.
Keep going. Okay, so the next one here is we're requesting approval to add funding to an existing maintenance service contract out at Terminal 6 with Harbor Industrial. We had done the contract with Harbor Industrial to help us with the crane maintenance back when ICTSI was still operating the terminal. So we had a certain amount of money in the contract, but once we took ownership of the terminal back again, we now have a much more expanded portfolio of business in comparison, and so that's good news with the work with Swire Shipping, the BN, but we're needing more dollars in the contract, and we're expecting much of these expenditures will be covered by rates and charges through the tenants that are actually operating at Terminal 6, and Jeff will go through the details.
Good morning. As Vince noted, this is a request to authorize the expenditure of additional funds under an existing maintenance services contract with Harbor Industrial Services Corporation. Just a little more background on our relationship with Harbor. Back in late 2014, the port issued an RFP to provide crane mechanical maintenance services at Terminal 6 and Terminal 4. We had 3 companies that responded to that RFP, and Harbor was rated as the highest responder by the port evaluation team at that time. Based on a staff recommendation back in January of 2015, we brought to commission the Harbor Services contract, which was ultimately approved for a 4-year term with 3 one-year options. And I would like to point out just what, under this contract, Harbor does provide ILW labor, they provide management on site, and they provide technical expertise to perform the maintenance services under the contract. After the departure of ICTSI as the terminal operator in 2017, the harbor contract was amended to clarify language in the agreement that would allow the port to add additional work scope as directed to the harbor services. So really our first phase of that additional work scope was back in 2017 when we terminated the ICTSI lease. We got back to port ownership all the rolling stock and cargo handling equipment on the terminal. So with that, we were in the maintenance game for all of that rolling stock. I think, as you remember, it was like 192 different pieces of equipment: reach stackers, forklifts, trucks, yard chassis, all that kind of equipment that was built up over at the terminal over time. So that was phase one of what we asked Harbor to take on as additional scope. And then in January of this year, to support our new BNSF rail service and the Swire shipping vessel calls at Terminal 6, we requested Harbor to provide ILW labor and additional on-site harbor management to operate the Terminal 6 truck gate, planning and placement of containers and other cargoes in the Terminal 6 container yard, and then ultimately loading and unloading rail cars with containers in our intermodal yard. So with that, that greatly expanded the work and labor requirements that Harbor's performing at the terminal. So at the time that we originally brought this to commission, we were expecting the port would spend about $2 million per year with Harbor on services for crane maintenance, kind of based on what our maintenance trends were at that time. Based on this increased work scope and to accommodate further business growth at T6, we now expect to be spending about $10 million a year on Harbor provided services. It's important to note, however, that we expect these expenditures will be largely covered by rates and charges from T6 users like Swire, like the BNSF, and hopefully other new business that we are able to achieve out at Terminal 6. So to cover this next 3-year period of operations at T6, we're requesting the Commission to approve an increase to the authorized expenditure under the Harbor contract in a total amount of $30 million.
I have a question just about the length here and maintaining optionality at T6, since business there might need to change over time. Are we exercising the option for 3 years, or are we just making sure that if we do, we have the money available?
Correct. We have not executed the option yet. That first 4-year option will expire in January of 2019, so it's coming. This is the request for funding, but we fully expect that we would execute an option year or two with Harbor to continue that continuity with our relationship.
And there are 1-year options.
1-year options.
1-year options.
Right.
Thank
So
you.
ultimately, it's a 7-year overall deal, and those options are port options. So we anticipate extending the contract fairly soon.
Okay, thank you. Any other?
I did have one question, just simply on the math. You said we're scaling up to 10 million per year. I can certainly understand that based on your description. Is there a simple table of math behind this? Because of the volume and the number of times we're doing certain tasks, it's going to increase the cost. Is there a detailed table behind this?
Well, I don't have a table with me today, but I can tell you how the numbers are derived. It's derived on what we expect the total man hours for union labor will be out there, and it's trending around, we anticipate 64,000 man hours per year. So you multiply that times an average wage that we pay Harbor for those services. And then there's also a bucket of management fees that we pay Harbor for their supervision and management of staff that are not union. So kind of 2 buckets of costs that we incur: labor, direct labor at the ILWU, and then a management fee. So we base that 10 million on roughly 64,000 man hours with some room to grow with new business. I think you've probably heard the rail business is growing pretty rapidly out there. So we think 10 million's probably at the higher end of what we'd be spending on an annual basis. But again, if we don't have the business to justify it, we don't spend the money, obviously.
Right.
Yeah.
I was just wondering what our base is like. We have a cost per task. Or...
Yeah, it's based on the West Coast contract alongshore. Those rates are really prescribed. So it was really our estimate on the hours, and we can put together a table for you if you'd like that just shows the different hours and how we came up with the number.
That'd be great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
Additional discussion on this item? If not, I'll take a motion and second for the executive director's recommendation.
Second.
Any other comments? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Thanks.
So we're moving back to the consent items, please. Which is, does any commissioner need a presentation on the consent items that were in our agenda? The consent items were the Estacada Enterprise Zone reauthorization, Columbia Cascade Enterprise Zone reauthorization, and the undevelopable land exchange agreement with Metro, Smith and Bybee Lakes, and Government Island. Call for a motion and second on the consent items. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Kristen. If you could come talk to us about T4, please.
Good morning, and we're very aware of the time constraints we have today. So what we will do is maybe condense the presentation down a little bit. But we're pleased to have the opportunity to be here today in front of you to talk a little bit about where things are at with Terminal 4 and the Superfund. And if you recall, our Marine Terminal T4 is within the Superfund site. This is an area that the port really recognized there was an opportunity to get in post-record of decision and start contemplating what the negotiation for agreement could look like for cleanup at T4. So we are here today to present kind of where we are in the progress on that issue. And we've got Jessica Hamilton here to talk about where we're at with T4 and Superfund.
Great, thank you. And thank you, commissioners. Am I on?
Oh, there you are.
No, I'm on. Thank you, commissioners. We'll try and be brief here. And I recognize that Superfund is not exactly the topic that most people want to end their meetings on, so I'll be mindful of that. As Kristen shared, we are here and we are excited to announce that the Port and EPA will be entering into an agreement later this month to allow the Port to move forward with some additional sampling and some preliminary design work, some early cleanup design at Terminal 4. Cleanup at Terminal 4 represents an opportunity for the Port to demonstrate leadership, to implement EPA's cleanup plan and move cleanup forward. For the Port, this agreement is a moment worth recognizing in the long trajectory that is the Superfund site. We're excited about this opportunity that this agreement represents to the Port to moving cleanup forward. But first, I'd like to give you just a brief orientation on Superfund, and I promise it'll be brief. So this is the overall Superfund site. It's roughly a 10-mile stretch extending from just north of the Broadway Bridge to nearly the confluence with the Columbia. The area outlined in red is the area of the Superfund site. The blue represents the Federal Navigation Channel or the shipping channel, and you see Terminal 4 at the very end of the site, near the end of the site with the flag marking it. It's important to know that the Superfund site is large and the contamination related to it is largely historic. Much of the contamination occurred during the World War II era and the subsequent eras from shipbuilding, ship breaking, and ship repair activities. Other marine and industrial activities also contributed to the contamination. Over 140 parties are liable for this site, And the site was first listed in 2000. Since 2000, there's been a ton of data collected and analyses done. Those data and analyses culminated into EPA's issuing of the Record of Decision in 2017. The Record of Decision, or ROD, is sometimes also referred to as EPA's cleanup plan. So this is a picture of Terminal 4, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about Terminal 4 specifically as it relates to Superfund. In 2003, the port signed an administrative order on consent with EPA. It's also a settlement agreement with EPA, essentially allowing the port to move forward with some early cleanup action. We did that because we recognized that there was some contamination in the river that we could address immediately and head on and help improve the conditions going forward, while also recognizing that this would not be our final action. In 2008, under this order, we removed 13,000 cubic yards of contaminated sediment. We also capped 8,000 cubic yards of contaminated sediment and repaired and stabilized roughly 850 linear feet of shoreline, largely in this Wheeler Bay area, which is the center area right here. We've spent roughly $30 million doing all of that work, as well as the upland work under DEQ oversight to date, and there's more work to come. This amendment itself that I'm here to present to you on represents the opportunity to move forward, building on the base of our earlier cleanup, and allows us to proceed in a quick fashion. So here are the terms of the actual agreement, the amendment to the agreement. We've negotiated a scope of work with EPA. That scope of work requires the port to conduct additional sampling. That sampling will be used to inform the design and also to develop a preliminary cleanup design roughly through the 30% stage. We estimate that timeline will last about 2 years, possibly a little bit longer, and our costs are around $3 million, possibly higher. The reason for so much uncertainty at this stage is we still have to negotiate the final work plans with EPA, and all of this work is overseen not just by EPA as the lead agency, but also Oregon Department of Environmental Quality and the tribal governments that have oversight roles. Of course, our costs and timelines will be refined as we gain more certainty, and this amendment is just the first step in a multi-step process. I wanted to also share with you that we plan to be before commission again when we're approving the next phase of work, because we'll have to bring the contracts forward for implementation of the cleanup work. So you'll be seeing more of me, and I promise to keep it brief then as well. So just to wrap up, what does this amendment do for us? This amendment allows the port to implement the Record of Decision, EPA's cleanup plan. It also allows us to move cleanup forward relatively quickly, and it embodies a commitment by the port to work with stakeholders on their priority issues. Specifically, I wanted to share a little bit more as it relates to the port's social equity policy that you all approved back in February. We have secured the commitment of our contractor that it will amend its contract to incorporate the port's social equity language, and we are pleased to report that. We are also working with our contractor around specific commitments and guidance on subcontracting opportunities, and the contractor has indicated not just a willingness, but a desire to work with us on that. We are also committed to working with the affected communities to develop an agreement around their priorities, and we've started that work and that outreach already, and that work will continue through the next several months. And then finally, we've committed to hosting a series of facilitated workshops in the next year for contractors to help them better understand what opportunities might exist and help build and create capacity in our local contracting community. The last thing that I'll mention is not specific to T4, but it's important for us to share with you that the port, the city, and the state recently entered into an intergovernmental agreement with Multnomah County to fund their work around education on fish advisories and fish consumption issues. The port and its other government partners are pleased to be able to facilitate this important work for the community because it does make a difference. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions?
More comment, I think. I think both the leadership at the port and the commission have been very eager to have us begin to sort of chart a path going forward. It's a very contentious issue. Commend you on creating this model of how we can work our way out of this morass. Curious as to how you feel this will position you with some of the other accountable parties and community groups who may bring a different lens to their expectations around this work. I mean,
it's a really good question, and it's one that we grapple with regularly. I will say that we'll be popular with some and we'll be unpopular with some, and depending on the specific issue, those who we are our friends will be our friends, and then the next day may be our enemies on this particular issue. But to demonstrate leadership, we feel like this is the right step and that we can't worry too much about what other people might think of us, that this is really the way to move cleanup forward in the harbor. The harbor was listed in 2000. It's been 18 years since that first listing. There are issues that are impacting human health and the environment, and we're anxious to move that work forward. We know that we can't do it alone, but we also know that leadership sometimes involves taking risk. And so we hope to do our best to have continued conversations both with the other potentially responsible parties, other governments that are affected, and the affected community stakeholder groups to try and forge a path that includes partnership opportunities. But it's going to be challenging, and we're certainly mindful of the challenge.
I also want to commend port staff on moving forward in a leadership way on this. I agree with you. It's been a long time, and folks are really affected by this site, and we need to move forward with the cleanup. I also want to commend you on in making sure that affected communities are involved in a way that they haven't been able to be involved before, despite the disparate impact on those communities with respect to this site. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Great.
Terrific. Thank you.
We are adjourned. Just a minute.